21 seconds, so any kind of mistake here will cost him the win, but Ferrari don't make too many mistakes in pit stops, do they? Michael doesn't make too many mistakes. Ferrari team in general are pretty much like a clockwork operation, and Michael Schumacher should have...
Yes, these words were actually said by F1's then commentator James Allen when talking about Ferrari at the 2004 French Grand Prix. Using Ferrari and strategy in the same sentence has long caused the Tifosi to squirm more often than not due to the many wrong calls made in the recent years, especially in 2022. The 2024 Italian Grand Prix was an incredible home victory for Ferrari thanks to a brilliant strategy call, but it had been a long time since Ferrari executed a great strategy to win a race, which led me to think, when was actually the last race Ferrari won at the pit wall? That said, Ferrari nailing the strategy would not be a completely new sight for those who have been following F1 for a long time. In fact, 20 years ago, the situation was basically the polar opposite. During the golden era built around the trio of Jean Todt, Brawn and Michael Schumacher, not only did Ferrari not allow their rivals to get close to them for many years, but they also made them look like amateurs time and time again. Now, let's go back in time and remember the feeling Ferrari evoked back then, both for us fans and the rivaling teams alike. The prancing horses entered the 2004 season with a bang. Until the French Grand Prix, Schumacher had won 8 of the first 9 races of the season. The only race he failed to win was the Monaco Grand Prix, where he didn't complete the race. Renault driver Jean Todt won the Monaco Grand Prix comfortably from pole position and got the first and only win of his Formula 1 career. His teammate, a young star driver by the name of Fernando Alonso, looked set to bring the team their first 1-2 finish since their return to Formula 1 in 2002. That is, until he crashed in the tunnel while trying to lap Ralf Schumacher. The Magny-Cours circuit, home of the French Grand Prix, the 10th race of the season, was not only of special importance to the French team that was on the rise. Coming into this weekend, Schumacher was also gunning for a then record-tying 7 wins in the same Grand Prix. Schumi also secured his 5th title at the 2002 French Grand Prix in July, with 6 races still to go. He joined Fangio's record of 5 World Championships, which had stood alone since 1958. Alonso took pole position and preserved the lead at the start at Renault's home Grand Prix, just as Trulli had done in Monaco. His gap to Schumacher widened a little at the start, but by lap 8, Schumi was back on Alonso's heels. As the first round of pit stops approached, the Bridgestone tires used by Ferrari were wearing less than the Michelins used by Renault. Now, to give a little bit of context, overtaking on track was next to impossible in Formula 1 in the 2000s, making it all the more important to gain a strategic advantage. Of course, there was no such thing as DRS to make passing easier, and unlike now, the durability of the tires was very long. So pitting earlier than your opponent and putting on fresh tires, or doing the undercut, was not a strategy that worked very well. We're also talking about a time when refueling during the race was allowed. Not only did the cars burn much more fuel, but the tank capacity was not large enough to complete the race from start to finish without adding more fuel to the car mid-race. So the main purpose of pitting in this period was to top up fuel, and while you're at it, to change the tires that hadn't actually lost much grip. Tire management wasn't a primary factor, especially in races with plenty of pit stops. Drivers were able to push the limits continuously, basically for the entire race. As the laps passed, the loss of tire performance was negligible compared to the 60 to 70 liters of fuel that was to be added in the pits. Therefore, the loss of performance caused by the durable tires was measured in tenths of a second, while a full tank made a difference in seconds compared to an empty one. Despite putting on fresh rubber, this made the cars coming out of the pits lap much slower than cars on old tires running on low fuel and who are about to pit. In short, pitting later or performing the overcut was the way to go in almost all circumstances. If they had enough fuel in the tank, the drivers would stay on the track longer than their rivals and try to gain a strategic edge, lapping in clean air with their lighter cars. Cars typically made 2 pit stops in races in this period of Formula 1, with the exception of 1 or 2 pit stops depending on the circumstances. Although pit stops with refueling took about 7 or 8 seconds, the time lost in the pit lane was only about 18 seconds in Manicure. This was due to the pit lane speed limit being 100 km per hour at the time, combined with the pit lane skipping the final chicane. The shorter time loss meant that the preferred strategy was a 3-stopper for this race. Now that the scene is set, let's go back to the 2004 French Grand Prix. There were no surprises in the first round of stops. After the pits, the gap between Alonso and Schumacher had increased to 4 seconds, and as in the first stint, the gap gradually closed as the stint progressed. By lap 25, the Ferrari driver had caught Alonso again, but was unable to make the overtake. Schumacher and Alonso were fighting for the win well ahead of the others, just as Hamilton and Verstappen were doing in many races back in 2021. It was clearly a two-horse race up at the front. Behind them, Trulli had taken third place at the start, though was unable to hold on to the front duo, allowing a large gap to open up. Even if Ferrari brought in Schumi for his second stop, the German would have rejoined the track in second place, well ahead of Trulli. So Ferrari basically had nothing to lose with an undercut. With this gap, Ross Brawn decided to put the crazy plan of Ferrari's head of strategy, Luca Baldisseri, into action on lap 29. With a pit stop that seemed absurdly short, Schumacher was given fuel that would last him for only 9 laps. Renault responded 3 laps later to defend their track position, but Ferrari, who had filled the car with very little fuel, used the fresh tires and the car's strong pace to their advantage on those 3 laps and took the lead. The French team was still confident though, as they thought Ferrari's final stint would be too long to keep up with the pace. This would both mean a long pit stop and a car that was incredibly heavy coming out of the pits, which would make the car very difficult to drive late in the race due to the excessive strain put on the tires. So if Renault stuck to their normal plan, Alonso would be able to put in much faster laps with a much lighter car around this time, taking back the lead after the third pit stops. Ferrari were also aware of this possibility though. With Schumacher leading by 5.5 seconds, everyone was expecting a long pit stop when the team called the then 6-time world champion into the pits for the third time with 28 laps to go. But the Italian team again sent their driver back on track following a short stop of only 6 seconds. This meant that Schumi would make an unprecedented 4th pit stop. 4 laps later, Alonso came into the pits for his final stop and was only 9 to 10 seconds behind Schumi when he rejoined the track. If Schumacher wanted to come out of his last pit stop with his lead intact, he would have to open up the gap even more. With this strategy, the German would drive in clean air until the end of the race, on fresh tires and in a lightly fueled car. All of the conditions that further emphasized Schumacher's greatest strengths as a driver and made him invincible. He could drive the car to the limit every lap of the race, both on the entry and the exit of every corner. As Schumi himself said in an interview in '95, this was his greatest strength as a driver. He had an extraordinary ability to have a consistent sense of where the limit of the car was, and he could drive the car at almost its absolute 100% limit at all times. This could be seen both in the way he pressed the accelerator pedal and in the small momentary corrections he made on the steering wheel constantly. Once he had the lead, Schumacher started a stint of laps where he drove with qualifying pace lap after lap, as he always did. The Ferrari driver was literally flying. Each lap he was a second quicker than Alonso, and in 11 laps he managed to extend the gap from 9 to 21 seconds, which put him far enough ahead to make his last stop and retain his lead.
So quickly, so Michael doesn't lose time between the Williams and the Jordan.
Well, certainly Alonso has lost time in traffic, and that's what's pretty much finished off his challenge. 21 seconds, so any kind of mistake here will cost him the win, but Ferrari don't make too many.
And indeed, as James Allen said, Michael Schumacher kept his lead without any problems after Ferrari completed their last pit stop without any mistakes. Schumi never looked back from this point on and took the checkered flag in first place. This strategy wasn't a sudden decision in the middle of the race though. It was clear from the way the car was set up for the race that the team had discussed this possibility in advance and prepared accordingly. The car had an extremely aggressive suspension setup for the Grand Prix. Ferrari's preferred soft rear suspension would have allowed Schumacher to attack the curbs much more, helping him drive faster with the trade-off of causing him to wear his tires more. Despite that, Schumacher's car was fitted with softer Bridgestones compared to his teammate Barrichello, who ran a standard 3-pit stop race. As is often mentioned when talking about this period of F1, the collaboration between Bridgestone and Ferrari was basically to the extent of Bridgestone being Ferrari's exclusive tire suppliers. By not supplying tires to any other team on the grid fighting at the front, Bridgestone was putting all its focus on Ferrari, and perhaps because of this, the limits of this strategy were much clearer for the Italian team. Although Ferrari were the faster team on Sunday, they were unlikely to take the win on the track. In conditions where overtaking was not possible, Ferrari executed an unthinkable plan to take the track position and literally snatch the win out of Renault's and Alonso's hands. There's also another little tidbit about this race. Renault looked set for a double podium in the final laps, their first since coming back to the sport as a works team in 2002. Even if they weren't to win the race, in a season dominated by Ferrari, that would still have been a mighty result for the team at their home Grand Prix. But Trulli, who'd kept Barrichello behind him for so long, left the door wide open at the penultimate corner on the last lap and let Barrichello through, losing third place at the very end. It's widely said that Renault team boss Flavio Briatore was furious after this incident, and the process of the Trulli and Renault relationship falling apart started with this race. His team had already desperately lost the lead due to Ferrari's unconventional strategy, so how could Flavio not be frustrated at losing the podium at the last moment too? Trulli failed to score any points at all following this race, despite having a points advantage of 46-33 to his teammate even after this race, and things deteriorated to the point that he was replaced before the end of the season. In the last 3 races, Renault fielded Jacques Villeneuve as their second driver. The 2004 French Grand Prix is one of the first races that I remember won with pure strategic genius. Which Grand Prix come to your mind where a team won by outsmarting their opposition? Please let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.